Hello and welcome to Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney, and in this video we are doing a full sew along for the Cashmerette Stanton hoodie pattern. We will be sewing through both views A and B. The Stanton hoodie is a wonderful sweatshirt / hoodie pattern that is meant for advanced beginners. This pattern is made with medium to heavy weight knit fabrics such as sweatshirt fleece, French terry, ponte, any of those types of fabrics. It features a beautiful curved front pocket. You've got the optional for the front pocket, aligned front pocket on either the pull-on hoodie view as well as the zip-up hoodie view. It also features a lined hood and the option for putting in grommets and having drawstrings or cording there at the edge of the hood as well. This pattern comes in the full size range at Cashmerette, from their size 0 up to their size 32, and all of the bust cup options as well. The Stanton hoodie hits about mid-hip and makes a really great pattern for both leisure type activities as well as a great item to dress up an outfit, as you know, kind of make a casual, business casual type outfit as well. In this sew along, we are going to be going through all the steps, like I mentioned, to do both views A and B. So hopefully all of your questions are going to get answered. In addition to the main fabric that I mentioned before, you're also going to need a lighter weight jersey, such as an ITY or just a jersey fabric, for the lining of the hood as well as the lining for that front pocket. There's also the option for some interfacing in a few areas. If you're doing view B, you may want interfacing on those zipper facings. And if you are putting grommets in your hoods for either view, you are going to probably want a little bit of interfacing at those points as well. Other than that, I will be going through the entire supply list that you're going to need, as well as which pattern pieces you're going to need to have cut out, how many you're going to need to cut out, and what needs to be interfaced, all of that as soon as we head to the cutting table. For my two versions, I am using a French terry for my pullover version with a cotton spandex jersey as the lining. And then for my zip-up hoodie version, I am using a cotton sweatshirt fleece that with a rayon spandex jersey for the lining on that one. So lots of different fabric options. You do want to make sure your main fabric does have at least 15% stretch across the grain line, not selvage with the grain line necessarily. Across from the grain line, you want that stretch, that 15% stretch, to be going around the body. This entire project will be sewn on the sewing machine, and I am using this beautiful Bernina 790 that is on loan to me from the University of Sewing. Thank you, University of Sewing. All sewing will be taking place on this serger, and that's the only machine you need. You just need a sewing machine. While I am doing some finishing with a serger, you do not have to use a serger, and we talk about that as well. If you would also like to get your hands on this pattern, this is one of the Cashmerette's collection patterns, meaning you can buy it directly off their website. However, if you would like to become a club member, of which I am one of their club members, this pattern is actually included with the club membership, as there is a Stanton expansion pattern as part of the club. Stay tuned for more on that. And that is how you get you can get the pattern included with the all access tier of their club as well. I've been a member of the club since the beginning. It's one of my favorite things to belong to. But again, it is also part of the regular collection, and you can purchase the pattern on its own through their website, and I will leave all of that linked down below. All right, without further ado, let's get sewing. So let's head over to the cutting table and go through our pattern pieces and supplies. Okay, let's go through what pieces we need for the two different views, as well as what needs to be interfaced, all that sort of thing, and as well as supplies. Okay, if you are making view A, which is the standard hoodie version, so not the zipper, just the standard hoodie version, kind of the sweatshirt with the hood, you are going to need of piece 1, you are going to need 1 cut out on the fold of fabric. This dark green is the main fabric we're using. And then 1 cut out on the fold of the lining of a lighter weight jersey. And you'll notice that there is a line here on the pattern cut here for lining. So find your size. Let's see, what did I do here? I did a size 12 on this one. So you can just fold over on that cutting line, and that gets cut on the fold for that lining piece. Okay. Piece 2 is your lower front, and for view A, you're going to need 1 cut on the fold. Piece 3 is your upper front, and this is going to determine what cup size you're using. For view A, you're going to cut 1 of these on the fold, and this is the CD cup. I'm making the CD cup for this version for Jenny. So here's the CD cup. Piece 4 is your upper back piece, which is right here. And we're going to need 1 of these cut on the fold. Piece 5 is our lower back piece, and we need 1 of these cut on the fold. Piece 6 is our shoulder yoke. Now this one is kind of a weird looking piece. Make sure you hit all of your notches, your double notches, and make sure you want to mark those dots that you've got on either end here. That's going to come in real handy when we're putting sleeves on and attaching this to the front and back. So you're going to need 2 of these. This fabric for this version is a French terry. I don't think I said that. Piece 7 are the sleeve, and you need 2 of these. Piece 8 is our cuff piece, and you need 2 of these, and this gets cut out of the ribbing. So I have got 2 of these cut out of this dark green ribbing. Piece 9 is our hood piece here. We need 2 of these of the fabric, regular fabric, cut out with the full piece, and then 2 of the lining fabric. So again, we're gonna fold along this line here to cut out that lining piece. And we need 2 of those lining pieces as well. Again, my lining is a cotton spandex jersey that some scrap I had in my stash. So I've cut 2 of those out as well. Now, this is where our grommet is gonna go, down here, and I've marked that on my piece. There is an option for putting interfacing in here, like a 1" by 1" square of interfacing into that area, and I will be doing that on both of my versions when we get to that point. So it is an option, but I'm going to use grommets, and I think it's very beneficial to put that interfacing there. So I will be putting a 1 by 1 piece of interfacing around those notches that I marked. So you'll see that when we get to that step. We need, of piece 10, which is our hood insert, we need 1 of these cut out in our fabric, so in my French terry here. And then we need 1 cut out of the lining, and again, we fold at that cut here for lining line, so it is shorter than the outside piece. So 1 of each of those. Piece 11 is our lower back ribbing. So we cut 1 of these on the fold, and this gets cut out of our ribbing fabric. So there is that one. And then our front for view A, which is this view, we're going to cut 1 of these out on the fold, again in the ribbing, and this is the lower front band. So and it gets cut out on the fold for view A. Then additionally, we are going to need a stretch needle. The pattern, and this is an option, it calls for 3/8 of an inch wide twill tape. You can also use ribbon, and that's what I'm going to use. This is optional, just going to help stabilize that back neckline. I will be using it though, so I wanted to show you guys a little bit of that. This is actually 1/2 inch wide, but you know, it will still work. So twill tape, 3/8 of an inch wide twill tape, or some sort of a ribbon. You could actually even use bias tape if you wanted to, if it was folded over. But yeah, something to stabilize that back neckline on the back in between the notches. And then we need for this view A, we need some grommets. And so I've got grommets here that are 1/2 inch wide on the inside. let's see, quarter inch wide diameter in the inside, and then 1/2 inch from the outside. So I've got a whole bunch of grommets here that we'll be using. Again, we can, and I'll get to that point, this is for the hood. You could also do a buttonhole stitch if you wanted, or the eyelet stitch actually if you wanted to on your sewing machine. And then we are also going to need some sort of cording. My favorite cording to use is a shoestring. You need 55 inches of cording. So I just bought, I think this is a 54-inch long shoestring. I buy shoestrings on Amazon because then the ends are finished. These work fantastic for drawstrings. So this is my favorite, but you can also just use regular cording, 55 inches of that, and then optional is cording ends if you want to get real fancy and add those cording ends to the end of your drawstrings. But again, I just like to use shoelaces because it's already done for you, and it makes really great drawstrings. So this is a 55-inch long, or 54, 56, something like that, at least 55-inch long shoestring for that. And then that is everything that we need for view A. If you are making view B, a lot of similarities, but there are definitely some differences. Let me get all my pieces over here. So with piece 1 for view B, you're going to cut along the view B line, and you actually are going to cut out 2 of these of fabric. So this is not cut on the fold. 2 of these on fabric, because we're going to have that zipper that's going to go in the front. And then 2 of those of your lining, which is a lighter weight fabric. I'm using rayon spandex actually for my lining on this version. This fabric is a sweatshirt fleece, so a cotton spandex sweatshirt fleece. And again, for that lining, you're going to fold over on your cut edge to get that. And then we are going to need, of piece 2, we're going to need 2 of these cut out of fabric, again at that B line, not the A, the view B line. So this doesn't get cut on the fold. You get 2 of those of piece 2, which is the lower front. Your upper front, we need 2 of these cut out, again on that view B line. This is the GH cup. I'm making this version for my daughter. This is the upper front. So it'll either be AB, 3A, B, or C, depending on which cup size you're using. Piece 4, just like with view A, this gets, you cut one of these out on the fold. Piece 5, also, we cut one of these out on the fold. Piece 6 is our, and that was the lower back, upper back and lower back. Piece 6 is your shoulder yoke. Again, make sure you mark all those notches. You want to make sure and get those little dots marked on your pattern pieces. That's going to come in really handy, but we need 2 of those. Piece 7 is our sleeve, and we need 2 of those cut out. Piece 8 is our cuff. We need 2 of those cut out of our ribbing. So I've got those 2 cut out of our ribbing. Piece 9 is our hood, and just like with the other version, we cut 2 out of fabric on this line and then 2 out of lining on that second line. So I've got 2 cut out of regular fabric, 2 cut out of lining, and again, I've marked that grommet spot that I will put that 1x1 square of interfacing there. Piece 10 is our hood insert, and we need 1 cut out of the regular fabric, which I've got here, and then 1 cut out of the lining. And again, you cut with that at that lining line, so that's why that piece is shorter. It will all make sense when we start sewing. Piece 11 is our lower back band, so you're going to cut 1 of these out on the fold, which I have done. That is cut on the fold there, out of that ribbing. Piece 12 is our lower front band, and for view B, we're going to cut along that view B line, and we cut out 2, and that gets cut out of the ribbing, as you can tell. There's 2 pieces there. And then for view B, you are also going to need to cut out piece 13, which is the zipper facing. So you're cutting 2 out of fabric, and then I have gone ahead and interfaced the back of these just with a lightweight fusible interfacing. This doesn't need to be knit. It can make the fabric not stretch. That's absolutely fine, which is what I've done here. We just want that stability for the zipper. So I've got 2 of those cut out and fused with a fusible interfacing. And then for view B, we are going to need, again, a stretch needle as well as the twill tape or ribbon. I'm using the same for both versions, this velvet ribbon. And then we also need, for view B, we need a 24-inch long separating zipper. And that's what this is. So when you unzip it, for like a jacket, so it actually comes apart. So we need the separating zipper, at least a 24-inch one. So that's what we have got for that. And then we need those grommets. So again, those same grommets that are 1/4 inch on the inside, 1/2 inch on the outside. And then I'm also using a shoestring for my cording for this one. So you'd either need the 55-inch, 1/4 inch wide diameter cording, and you can have the optional 2 cord stops, or you can go the easy route and just grab a set of shoelaces off of Amazon. And you get a lot because there's obviously 2 shoelaces. So you get enough for 2 projects in 1 bundle of shoelaces, which is kind of nice. So there you go. That is everything that we need to sew either view A or view B of our Stanton hoodie. So let's go to the sewing room and get started sewing. All right, so in the pattern, there are instructions for a way to do, to finish your seam allowances called it's a faux flat fill seam. And I'm just gonna demonstrate how that seam finish works so that it could be an option if you would like to use that. It's not what I'm using in the rest of the pattern as we go through this, but I do wanna show you how to do that. It is in the pattern instructions in case that is something you'd like to try. So we're going to take our fabric and we're going to place it right sides together. I'm just using a scrap here. Right sides together along our seam edge here. And we're going to pop a couple of pins in. And in the pattern, there are instructions if you are doing the faux flat fell seam finish. It will tell you which side to trim and all that kind of stuff. But we are going to go to the sewing machine, and with our 3.0 millimeter stitch length, or straight stitch, we're going to sew this seam at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to do that real quick. I'll be right back. All right, so I've sewn that seam at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, the instructions are going to tell you which, this next step we're going to be grading one of the seam allowances. The instructions will tell you which one to do. It will tell you, grade the seam allowance of piece 2 or piece 3, whatever the case may be. So do follow along those instructions. But whichever one it tells you, we're just going to now trim just that seam allowance. These are applique scissors I'm using, which work great for this kind of work. But we're trimming that seam allowance to 1/8. These are, applique duckbill scissors, sometimes called. All right, just like that. So now we've got one of our seam allowances at 1/8 of an inch, and then the other one is still at that 3/8 of an inch. Now, here is where we can do a couple of things. You can finish off that longer seam allowance. You can finish that off with a zigzag stitch or a serge stitch. Just be if you're using a serger, be very careful that you don't trim any of the seam allowance off when you're doing that. I'm not going to do that because I want to show you how to do this if you don't have a serger or anything at all. So I'm not going to be doing that, but that is an option, is to finish off this longer seam allowance. All right, now we're going to be doing a little bit of pressing. So now we are going to take our seam allowance and we're going to fold the seam allowance over to where the longer seam is folded over that short one that we graded. And again, the instructions will tell you which way you need to do this. And I like to press that from both sides, both the wrong side and the right side. All right. our next step is that we now want to pin this in place. So just take your pins from the right side. We're pinning this from the right side because we're going to be sewing from the right side. All right, now flip it over. Make sure that you've caught that seam allowance on the back, and we are all good there. But now we're going to go back to the sewing machine together, and we are going to stitch with our 4.0 millimeter stitch length straight stitch at just 1/4 of an inch away from this fold, and we're going to sew top stitch along this seam line. So let's go do that together. All right, so like I said, we are sewing at just 1/4 of an inch with that 4.0 millimeter stitch length. And we're sewing it just 1/4 of an inch away from that previous seam, that folded edge. So now it looks just like that. Let's go do the last optional step here at the pressing station. All right, we can give this a real quick little press. Sometimes that likes to get bubbly when that's knit. So we've got our top stitching here on the front, and then on the back, if we had finished off this seam allowance before folding it over and stitching it down, we would be finished. But if you would like to, this is an optional step, we can now trim that other seam allowance close to this top stitching line, such as like this. Just like that. So it's trimmed really, really close. Again, if you finished off that seam allowance in that optional step before, you don't need to do this. But now we have got a faux flat fell seam that keeps everything nice and encased and looks really great as well. So again, it's a couple of extra steps to do this kind of seam finish, but if you would like to use this on the whole rest of your Stanton, it will tell you in the instructions at what point you can use this finish, and you are more than welcome to do that. Hope this was helpful. Okay, I'm starting off if you are making view A, and we're going to be working on this pocket piece. Now before we get started, a couple of things. I'll say this when we start view B as well. I am using a stretch thread. So this is the Metler Seriflex. So it's got a little bit of stretch in the thread. It's not elastic thread, it's just thread that's got some stretch in it. This is not necessary for this pattern. You can use regular, your all-purpose thread. That is absolutely fine. This is just a nice little, it just makes it a little bit easier. We are going to be sewing the entire top on the sewing machine, and then I'm going to be finishing off my seam allowances with a serger, but we will be using the sewing machine for everything, and you don't have to have a serger to do this at all. So I am using the stretch thread. I'm using a size 11 stretch needle, Schmetz stretch needle. It's a ballpoint needle, but it's a ballpoint plus it's a stretch needle, which makes things a little bit easier. You may also want to put either a dual feed on your machine if you've got that option, or put on a walking foot. You can buy a generic walking foot for any sewing machine, and they are priceless when it comes to working with knits. Most of this pattern will be made using a 3 millimeter length stitch, straight stitch, but there are a few areas where we do have to have some stretch, and we're going to be using a zigzag stitch that is 2.5 millimeters long and 0.5 millimeters wide. So the pattern will tell us when to do that, and I will make note of that when we get to those parts. But again, I'm using a stretch thread just to make that even a little bit more give with those stitches, okay? For seam finishes, if you're using a knit that doesn't ravel, and most knits do not ravel, you don't have to finish your seam allowances. But if you would like to finish your seam allowances, you can either finish those off with a serger, with a zigzag stitch, or there are also instructions in the pattern on how to do a faux flat fell seam. It is up to you what you would like to use. Again, I'll be just doing the serger to finish off mine, but if you would like, if you don't have a serger, that's totally fine. You can finish those off with a zigzag, or just leave your seams raw, because again, most knit fabrics do not ravel. All right, let's get started. I am going to be using Wonder Clips as opposed to pins. I just find that a little bit easier when it comes to knits. I'll probably use a pin, yeah, when we're trying to get precise things. But you know, you can, if you don't have Wonder Clips, that's fine. You can also use pins. So we need piece one, and we need both our lining piece and our outer piece. So I'm just going to open this up. I'm actually just going to give my piece just a little bit of a iron. It's looking a little wrinkly. Okay, and next we're gonna take our lining piece. Remember, our lining piece is shorter than our outer piece, obviously. But we're gonna line up our cut edges over here to the side. And here at the top, you will have a little dog ear up here at the top of your outer fabric, and that's totally fine. And then we can go ahead and pin the other side. It's going to make it smaller. That's totally fine because our lining piece is smaller than our outer piece, as it's supposed to be. And pin that. All right, now we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and with our 3mm stitch length, we're going to sew at 3/8 of an inch. Again, that's our seam allowance, this seam here. So let's go over to the machine and do that. All right, so I'm using a high contrast thread. I'm using white so you can see what I'm doing. Obviously, you're going to want to use a matching thread. Again, I've got a 3mm length stitch. This is the same stretch thread I was showing you. It is in both my top thread and my bobbin. The stretch thread you put in both, it's the same as using regular thread. So it's both in the bobbin and in that top thread. Again, we are sewing with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we are just going to backstitch there at the top and then sew down. I have dual feed on my machine, meaning it's feeding both the top layer and the bottom layer through evenly. But if you don't have that, I do highly recommend a walking foot when it comes to working with knits so that your fabric is not stretching while you're sewing it. And we're gonna backstitch. Okay, so we've got that seam sewn. So we're gonna come over here to the other side that we also pinned, and we're also going to stitch that. Make sure, because that outer layer is longer than the inner layer, make sure that nothing is caught up underneath that you don't mean to sew. Yeah. All right, now we are ready to take this over to the ironing board and give it a good press and get that nice and flat. Okay, so here's what our piece looks like. Our outer fabric, we have a way more here in the middle than we do our inner fabric, but we have both of those seams sewn. So we're gonna take this piece and we're gonna fold it right side out first. And now we're gonna lay it to where it all lies nice and flat. And that outer edge is going to wrap around to the lining edge. I love the way that this finishes. It's just a really beautiful finish. So I'm just going to kind of finger press everything in order. Then we're going to give it a good press. And because Jersey just loves to curl, I am going to take some pins and just pin along the top here to keep it wrangled. Both there on the top and then also here on the bottom. All right, now we're gonna go back to the machine and we are going to top stitch from the right side 1 inch in, which should be on or really close to this seam that's right here. It's probably not gonna be perfect, but don't forget, we're gonna sew with this side up. If it's not catching perfectly on the back, it's on the inside of the pocket. No one's gonna see it, so that's okay. So I'm just going to lay this out nice and neat. If you want to mark in your 1 inch line, that's fine, to give yourself a sewing line to follow. I'm just going to be lining it up on my at my machine on the side for the 1 inch, but totally up to you, whatever makes you feel better. And again, I'm using a very high contrasting thread, so let's go over to the machine and get that top stitched. All right, we're going to top stitch at that 1 inch mark, which for me is this mark right here on my machine. So I'm just lining up my edge, my folded edge with that. And the pattern also asks us to go up to a 4mm stitch length for that top stitching. So I can do that. And now we're just gonna sew. And I am back stitching at the top and the bottom. then do the other side. Okay, I'm going to quickly go back down to 3 millimeters so I don't forget to do that when I come back to sew. All right, so now we've got this. Let's go back to the ironing board and we are going to continue on. Okay, so now we are going to continue constructing our fronts of our view A. Next we need piece 2, which is our lower front. And we are going to take our constructed pocket piece here. And I've marked that center fold line on both the top and the bottom with little notches. I always do that. Any piece that's cut on the fold, I mark that. So we are going to match up our center pieces, but we do have notches here on either side that should match up with the outer edge of our pocket. So that is included with the pattern. So I am just putting this wrong side of the pocket to the right side of the lower front. And if you want to add a couple more in, because again, jersey likes to be curly. There's notches here at the bottom that this edge also matches up with. Okay, now we are going to base this pocket into place. So I'm going to go to the sewing machine. You don't really need to see me do this part. And I'm going to sew, I'm actually going to sew it 1/4 inch so that it doesn't get, so when I sew my 3/8 inch later, this basting doesn't need to be removed. But I'm going to sew at 3/8 inch, and I'm just going to sew the top of this pocket together and also the bottom. So I'm just going to base those two pieces in place real quick, and I'll be right back. Okay, so we next need our piece 3, whether that's A, B, or C, depending on which cup size you're using, which is our upper front piece. And then we also need our piece that we just sewed. So here is our lower front. I've got it basted here at the top and here at the bottom at 1/4 inch so that hopefully we don't have to remove any stitches when we get to that point. All right, so our piece 3, we are going to open up. Like so. And at the bottom of our piece 3, which is this area right here, we are going to pin right sides together the top of our pocket. Now the curved edge of your lower front is what's getting sewn to the bottom of your upper front. So I'm just going to match my center notch here I cut. And then I'll match outside edges. And then we can go throw in, there's other notches we can match here. And there's a notch here at the bottom that matches with this lower piece. Throw another one in there too. Again, that jersey likes to be real curly, which can be annoying, but if you're just patient, it all works out. All right, so now we've got the lower front pinned to the upper front. So let's go over to the machine now, and we are going to sew that seam. Okay, we're back at our 3 millimeter stitch length, sewing at 3/8 inch. Okay, once we have sewn that seam, now you can finish off the seam allowance if you would like, or you could do the faux flat fell that's in the pattern, whatever your preference. So either zigzag that seam allowance, or I'm going to just run mine through the serger real quick, and then I'll meet you at the pressing table and we're going to press it up towards the body so we can top stitch it down. All right, so we've got our lower front sewn to our upper front. If you have any of your basting stitches popping out, you can take those out now. But because I did mine at 1/4 inch and then sewed that at 3/8, that looks really good. All right, so now we want to do some pressing. This is where it comes in really handy to have a tailor's ham or a seam roll or even just a rolled up towel or newspaper with a towel. But we are just going to basically press that seam allowance up towards that upper front. Just like so, and you can press it from the front or the back. Again, I have serged my seam here, but you don't have to. I could have left this raw, like it would have been fine if I had left this raw. All right, now we are going to go back to the machine, and I want to top stitch this, well, to keep that seam, number one, laying flat, but also it's just kind of the look of the top. And the more white top stitching I've got, the more intentional it looks. So we're going to just go back, and at 1/4 of an inch, I'm just going to top stitch along this seam, basically sewing that seam underneath in place towards the upper front bodice piece. All right, so let's go do that real quick. All right, so I'm taking my stitch length back up to that 4.0 millimeter length, since that's the length that we did for the top stitching on our pocket piece here. And again, I am just sewing, making sure that that seam allowance is going up towards the upper front, not the lower front, and just top stitching that in place. Kind of giving a slight tug on that seam allowance as I go so that everything lays nice and smooth. There we go. Okay, that's it for view A's front. If you are doing view A, you can now skip ahead to the back, to sewing the back section. And I'm gonna real quickly go over to view B and get us this far on view B. Okay, these are the instructions for view B, or at least we're going to be doing the front of view B here in this next few steps. So if you are doing view A, you need to skip this section and go back to the, skip ahead to the sewing the back sections, because that's where you'll pick back up. All right, so we're gonna need pocket one, or piece one piece, which is our pocket piece. Again, we need 2 of the lining pieces and 2 of the outer pieces. But before we get into that, a few things about the pattern. Number one, we are sewing with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. We are using a straight stitch of 3 millimeter length. There will be parts of the pattern where we'll be switching to a zigzag to give it that stretch that we need. And those parts, and I'll let you know when we get to those parts, we're going to be using a zigzag that is 2.5 millimeter long, 0.5 millimeter wide. And again, I'll let you know when we get to those points. This entire project can be made on the sewing machine. You absolutely do not need a serger, but you might want to finish your seam allowances. Now this is knits. The 2 that I am making in this sew along, I would not need to finish seam allowances on either one of them because they do not ravel. But if you do have a fabric that ravels, or if you want to just a little bit cleaner finish, you can either finish off those seam allowances with a serger, with a faux overlock stitch on your sewing machine, or with a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. There are also instructions inside the pattern that show you how to do a faux flat fell if you would like to try that as well. I will be sewing my seams per normal and then just finishing those off with a serger, but again, you can finish them off with a zigzag stitch just as easily. I am also using a Metler thread that is the Seriflex, which is a thread that has some stretch to it. I am doing this because I just want a little bit of extra give there. It's really great for knit fabrics. But it's not necessary. You don't have to use it. I just want that little bit of extra give, and I think this is really cool thread that's now available on the market, and I wanted to try it. So I'm using the Seriflex for both of my projects. Also, I'm using a size 11 Schmetz stretch needle. That is my preference when I'm working with any kind of knit fabrics that have some elastane in it, which both of these do. But you absolutely want to use a ballpoint needle no matter what for using knit fabrics. Stretch needle is a ballpoint needle, but it has a little bit of extra zhuzh to it that really helps if you're using a fabric that's got any elastane there in it. Other than that, I think that that's it. I think we can kind of go ahead and get started. I am using Wonder Clips to clip my pieces together, but you can absolutely use, I'll probably use pins in a few places as well. All right, so for step 1, we need one of these pocket pieces and one of these lining pieces, the corresponding lining piece. So we're going to be, let's give this a quick little press. We are going to be sewing our pocket lining to our pocket, and our pocket lining is much smaller than our pocket piece, and that's intentional, at 3/8 of an inch here on this side. So I'm going to line up those raw edges. They will line up great at the bottom. At the top here, though, there will be a little bit of a triangle of the main fabric that's going to pop out. That's fine. That is what we want. Okay. All right. Now we are going to go to the sewing machine, and we are going to sew this at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right. Again, using a 3.0 millimeter stitch length. Yes, that is right. I'm going to sew this seam at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm back stitching at the top and bottom. I am also have dual feed on my machine. If you do not have a dual feed function on your machine, you are going to want a walking foot. It makes sewing with knits so much easier. And any sewing machine, there are generic walking feet out there that will work on any sewing machine. I highly recommend. All right. So there we have got that line of stitching right there. Now we're going to go to the ironing board and do some pressing. Okay, so now we are going to turn and put our lining piece and flip it right side out. And we're going to match up those raw edges, and that's going to bring the outer edge over to the wrong side, which is what we want. I'm going to give that a quick press. Okay, now before we go and do our top stitching on the right side, I am just going to pop a couple of clips in here just to keep everything, stable. So I'm going to put some up there and then some down here on those raw edges. Just want everything to stay how it's supposed to. Okay, now we are going to go over to the machine, and we are going to sew from the right side at a 1-inch seam allowance all the way down. Now that should match with that seam that is right back here, but if it doesn't, and it probably won't, it won't be perfect, that's okay, because that's the inside of the pocket. No one's going to see that. So we're going to go at a 4 millimeter. I'm going to take my machine stitch length up to 4 millimeter and top stitch at 1 inch along this folded edge. Okay. Taking my stitch length up to 4 millimeter. And my 1 inch is right here. So I'm lining up that folded edge to that 1 inch. And we are going to top stitch. Like so. All right, once you've got that top stitch, let's go back to the ironing board, and we're going to put this onto the lower front. All right, so now we've got our pocket done. We've got our top stitching stuff and our pocket little pieces done. So now we need piece 2, which is our lower front, and we do need 2 of those. I just have one here right now because I'm showing you how to do it on one side, and you just do the same on the other. So we've got this right side up, and we're going to set our pocket wrong side down. So my pocket's right side up, my lower front is right side up. So I'm putting the wrong side of my pocket to the right side of my lower front, matching the edge of the pocket to the notch here and the edge of the pocket to the notch down here. And then I'm going to move these closer here because we're going to do something that's going to seem kind of strange here at the front. I'll explain it. We are now going to take the top edge of this pocket and peel it up. So under here, we have got our pocket lining is right sides together with the lower front. So we're just going to pull the pocket piece away. And we are going to place some pins there. Okay, now we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to sew just the lining to the lower bag. So we're keeping this top pocket piece out of the way. We're going to sew this at 1 inch seam allowance. And then we're going to trim it, finish it off. We're reducing bulk at the zipper is what we're doing here. That's why we are doing this, just so you know why we're doing this kind of weird. All right, so let's go to the sewing machine and sew this seam allowance at 1 inch. Okay, so I'm at my 3mm stitch length. I am lining this up, my raw edge up with my 1 inch mark there. And we're again just sewing the lining to that lower front. Okay, like so. So it's at 1 inch. So now we are going to trim it and then to 1/4 inch and then finish off that seam allowance. Okay, so I am actually going to trim it and finish off the seam allowance in one fell swoop with my serger. But you can also just trim that seam allowance to 1/4 inch and then finish that off with a zigzag if you'd like. So go ahead and do that and then I will meet you right back here. All right, so I trimmed that seam allowance down to 1/4 inch and I finished it off with my serger. Again, you can do zigzag, whatever. So that when we lay the top part of this pocket piece over, it should now extend beyond that 3/4 inch, which is what we want. We've reduced the bulk. Okay? So that is the goal. So now we are going to continue pinning all the layers together. And now I'm just going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to baste at 1/4 inch this top and the bottom together so that all those pieces are working as one when we get to these next steps. Okay, so I'm going to do that really quickly and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so now we have a pocket piece that looks like this. You need to do the same thing to the other side. So this is what it looks like from the front, and then from the back we've got that pocket piece that extends past the back of that. Okay, so go ahead and do that to the second side so that we've got 2. And then we need our piece 3, A, B, or C, which is our upper front piece. And on this one, let me see here, I want this one. We're going to be taking this one, and we are going to be matching the bottom of this piece with the top of our lower bottom. And we have got a notch here that we can match. And then we're going to match our raw edges here at the side seam. And then here at the front, this edge matches up to the end of the pocket, not that area that we trimmed back. So it will look, we are pinning to that piece, we're not matching to that. And then we can put a couple more in. Like so. All right. I'm going to go to the machine and we are going to sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, so we're going to sew that seam at 3/8 inch. All right, so now we've sewn that seam. So now you can leave it as is, which I could totally do on this, or finish it off. I'm going to run mine through the serger real quick, and then I'll meet you back at the pressing station to do some pressing. Okay, so once we've got that sewn and we've got it finished, we need to take a tailor's ham or rolled up towel or newspaper with some towel, just so we've got a raised surface so we can press that seam allowance up towards the upper bodice or the upper front. So here's our pocket down here, and then our upper front up here, and we just want that seam allowance going towards the upper front. All right, now we are going to go back to the machine and we are going to top stitch this in place. We're going to go back to our 4mm length stitch, and we're going to top stitch this in place to stitch that seam allowance up towards that upper bodice. So let's go do that. All right, let's do some top stitching. I have moved my stitch length back up to 4.0mm. And now we are going to just sew at about 1/4 inch. That seam allowance, sewing that seam allowance to the upper front. All right, just like so. We're going to do the same thing to the other side, and then we have our view B fronts sewn, and now we're ready to move to the backs. Okay, these next steps are for either view. So whether you're doing A or B, you're going to be following along these steps. For this, you are going to need piece 4, which is our upper back piece, as well as piece 5, which is our lower back piece. Now our lower back piece has got 2 notches that are here at the top that you should have marked, and then there's 2 notches here at the bottom of our upper back piece. We can set these pattern pieces aside. And we are going to be taking our upper back right side up, this is the bottom here, and putting our lower back to that right sides together. And we are matching those double notches that are there at the bottom of the pattern, as well as center back. And then the other set of notches. And then we can put a little clip here at the end. All right. So we've got these right sides together. I am now going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew at 3/8 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to finish that seam allowance because again, I'm using a serger to finish my seam allowance. However you're finishing your seam allowances are fine. And then I will meet you back here. All right, once we've sewn lower back to upper back and finished off the seam allowance, if that's something you're doing, we are going to open this up. And just like we did with the front, we are going to press that seam allowance towards the upper back. Okay, once we've given that a good press, we're now going to go back to the machine and we are going to top stitch, just like we did on the front, top stitch this seam so that we are stitching that seam up towards that upper back piece. So let's go do that. Okay, so your back should look like this. You should have it top stitched nice and neat to that lower back up into the upper back and that top stitched. All right, for this next step, we are going to assemble the bodice. And so this is for both views. Once again, you've got your back the backs should look the same no matter what you are, what version you're making. But we're also going to need our fronts. Now, obviously our fronts are going to look a little different, but this goes together the same way. This is the view A front, but view B front, you've just got 2 separate pieces instead of it being on one. I'm going to show you how to do one side of this and then you can do the other side yourself. But you're going to need your front, your back, assembled front, assembled back, and then you're also going to need this piece 6, which is your shoulder yoke. And you want to pay attention to the back where it says the back and you've got 2 notches, and then your front where you've got 1 notch, and then you've got a notch here at the shoulder and then a notch here at the neckline. So it's important to keep the orientation of this correct. So we're going to take the front, which is down here. We're going to take this one piece and we're going to put it right sides together with our front up here at this area, and the notch should match really well. I'm going to use pins for this point because we're going to have to get down for our little marked point here. And then I'm going to mark or pin it up here at the neckline. And then down here where we're kind of starting to get kind of to that arm's eye, we should have a dot, which my dot is right here on this piece. So I'm going to stick a pin through that dot, and then a matching dot on the back of this one. And we want those to match. All right. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew from the dot to the neckline with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we will do that together. All right, so I've got my 3mm stitch. I'm going to go right and just put my needle right where that dot is. And now we are going to sew at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way to the end. Like so. So if we trim this thread here. So we've not sewn it all the way down here, but we've got that nice and sewn. Okay, let's go back to the ironing board, and we will pin the other side to the back. Okay, now that our yokes are attached to the front, we need to attach our yokes to the back. So we've got our double notches. I went ahead and sewed both sides of mine here. Again, this doesn't matter which view you're doing, it is the same. And I'm gonna lay my back right side down on top of this, okay? So we have got a double notch that's up here at this back, and we're gonna be matching that double notch. And then you've got kind of like a weird little jog that's like right up here at center back. Well, that's gonna match pretty perfectly there with the back edge of that yoke piece. And then on this end, we've got that dot that we will be matching. On both sides, like so. You can pop a couple more pins in there if you'd like. Okay, let's go back to the sewing machine, and we're gonna sew this seam at 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so no matter which version you're doing, which view you're doing, you're gonna have your back seams, yoke seams sewn, and your front yoke seam sewn. So whether or not you've got your front cut open or not. And I will show you both versions here in a second, what those look like finished. But now we just wanna put our, because we've got kind of, everything's nice and open here, put our ham, and we wanna press our front yoke seams towards the upper front. And obviously everything I showed you, you're gonna do on both sides. And then we're gonna press our back seams, back yoke seams to upper back. We can give that a good press on the back and then also on the front. And then, like we have been doing with everything else, we wanna give that a top stitch. So we're going to top stitch it to upper back as well as upper front. And we're going to lengthen that stitch length to 4.0 millimeter to do that top stitching. Okay, so I'm going to do that top stitching, and then I'll meet you back here to show you what that looks like on both view A and B. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got before we move on to our sleeves. So again, this is for all views. So now we've got everything's attached kind of at the shoulders, if you will. So we've got, this is view A. So we've got our front here. We've got everything top stitched towards that upper front piece. And here on the back, we've got things top stitched towards the upper back piece. And everything is just kind of one big circle. And then with our view B, same thing, except we have got that front is separate. We've got two separate sides here that will be attached with a zipper here in a bit. But two of those sides, but our yokes still look the same. We've got everything top stitched towards the upper front and also top stitched towards the upper back. Okay? So now we want to grab our piece 7, which are our sleeves. And I'm going to show you again, we're working on view A, but it's the same for view B. And I'm just going to show you one side. So we've got, again, everything is opened up. We're installing the sleeve flat. This is my back. This is my front. I'm going to turn this sideways so that we've got our armscye. We've got our double notches here. This is our top of the sleeve notch. And then we've got our front single notch here. So here's our armscye. Here's the neckline. We've got back. We've got the front. We are going to take one of our sleeves. And so here's the top of our sleeve, but we are actually putting it right sides together. And so it seems counterintuitive because the sleeve is curving this way and this is curving this way. But we're going to clip, pin, whatever you're doing here, our notches here at the top. So matching that top of the sleeve notch with that sleeve notch that's on that yoke piece. And then we're going to pull our double notches over here and pin those together. And then we're going to do it the end of this armscye, or the sleeve head to the end of our armscye is what I'm trying to say. And then on this other side, we're going to bring this side around to match that front single notch with the front single notch on the sleeve. And then edge of the sleeve head to the edge of the armscye. And now we've got a little bit of fullness that's in between some of these. You can go now this is knit, so you can kind of stretch it a little bit, pop in a couple more clips or pins. The top stitching of the seams on the yoke really help to keep everything nice and flat. All right, so now we have the sleeve pinned or clipped in flat, because we say flat because none of the underarm seam hasn't been done and your side seam hasn't been done yet. So now let's go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew this seam at 3/8 of an inch. All right, so I've got my machine set to a 3mm stitch length, just a straight stitch. And I'm going to sew with the sleeve against the feed dogs, even though I've got a dual feed on here, which in theory feeds things through evenly. Any little extra bit that the feed dogs might be feeding that bottom layer through just a little bit more, we want that on the side that has the more ease, which is the sleeve itself. All right, so we're just going to start here at one underarm seam, keeping those edges, cut edges flush, and just making sure that we are, kind of pulling things as we go so that nothing gets caught up underneath there that we don't want caught up there. Okay, and we can go and check and make sure everything looks good. We have nothing pinched. So we have got our sleeve now set in there nice and neat. Okay, we can now finish that seam allowance or not, depending on if you're finishing your seam allowances or not. Finish that seam allowance and do the second sleeve, and then I'll meet you back at the pressing station. All right, once we've got our sleeves in and everything is still, you know, we could still lay everything pretty flat with the sleeves, and here is the back and here is the front. Now we are going to sew up our side seams. Again, this is for all views. Sew up the side seams, and we're going to sew up our side seam and go all the way through the end of our arm, our sleeve. So we're just going to take and match up right sides together our underarm seam that's right here. And we want those seam allowances going towards the sleeve. Just going to put a notch. And then we can match the end of our sleeve. Feel free to stick a pin in the middle there if you'd like, or a clip. And then with the body of our sweatshirt, doesn't matter again which view we're doing, let's match up our bottom. So this is the bottom of our hem. This is where the band will be sewn here at the bottom. And then we want to match our seams where the upper back and front got sewn to the lower back and front. We want to make sure that that seam matches really well. And then up here at the top, we've got a notch there on the bust that matches a notch on the back. This version here is the CD cup, so it's not quite as pronounced as like the GH, but we want to put a pen there and ease in any fullness you've got if you're doing one of the larger cup sizes. There'll be just a little bit more easing there, okay? So we are going to now go to the sewing machine, and we are going to start at the bottom hem, and we are going to sew all the way through to the end of the sleeve on this side. So let's go do that. Okay, so we're going to start at the hem with our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we are at a 3mm stitch length. So all the way up the side. And then when we get to that underarm, we have to kind of pivot just a little bit, readjust that. And then we're sewing down the sleeve. And then back stitch at the end. And now we have got our side seam sewn. So go ahead and finish that, do the other side the same way, and then I'll meet you back at the pressing station. Okay, so now we've got what looks like a sweatshirt or a jacket, depending on your view, now that we have our side seams all nice and sewn up. So before we go on to the cuffs, we just need to press these seam allowances towards the back. And this is where seam roll comes in nice. It's just a little bit easier to stick in there, especially down the sleeve mostly. So we are just going to stick that in there, and we're going to press those seam allowances again towards the back. And we're going to do this on both sides. Okay, once we've got our side seams pressed, we can set this aside for just a minute, because now we are going to work on our cuffs. So again, this is for all views. We are working on our cuffs. You need piece 8, which is the cuff piece. Okay, so we're just going to take and one of our cuff pieces, just going to put that It's right side up. Okay. And we're going to put the shorter ends, which are the ends that we have our notches. We're going to put those right sides together, matching those notches. Pop a couple of pins in. Do that on both of our cuff pieces. Okay, now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then you don't really need to finish this one off because this is going to get folded over itself. And so the raw seam will never be seen. It'll be all enclosed. So I'm not going to. So I'm just going to sew this seam at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I've sewn that seam, but this seam I sewed with the zigzag stitch, okay? So this seam that I just sewed was with a zigzag stitch that was 2.5 millimeters long and 0.5 millimeters wide. So it's a very, very slight zigzag stitch, but enough to give us the stretch that we need, okay? So I've done that on both of my cuffs. Now, you may be able to get your seam roll in here. We're going to press the seam allowance open. We'll see if we can. Oh, look, we can. Whoop. All right, we're going to press that seam allowance open. And then we're going to fold this in half, wrong sides together. So we're going to match up that seam. And like I said, tuck that all nice and in so that seam that we just sewed is not ever going to be visible. And match up those cut edges. Give it a little tug to get everything to lay nice and flat. Then I like to go and just give it a real good press. Now you can baste this cut edge together if you want, but you don't need to. So let's do that to the second cuff. Okay, our cuffs are now ready to be sewn to our sleeves, and this is for all views. This works the same. So I'm first going to take my jacket or hoodie, and I'm going to turn it right side out. It's currently inside out from having its side seam sewn. Okay, so we've got it right side out. So we're going to take one of our cuff pieces and we're going to put it over our end of our sleeve here. And we're going to match the underarm seam with the underarm seam basically of the cuff. Making sure that your seam allowances are going the way that they're supposed to. We're going to pop a pin in. And now our end of our sleeve is bigger than our cuff. So we've got to stretch our cuff to fit. So if you just kind of stretch that, make sure that your raw edges are lined up. And once everything is fitting in there nicely, then you can pop pins around the edge. Like so. Okay, now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew the cuff to the end of the sleeve with our zigzag stitch. All right, now it's time to sew our cuff. I'm going to start at the seam here underneath. And again, I've got this set on the zigzag stitch. So I'm sewing this at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, but I've got it at a 2.5 millimeter length and a 0.5 width. And I'm just going to start sewing. And as I go, remember that the cuff needs to be stretched as we go. The cuff's against the feed dogs in this situation. So I'm just kind of gently stretching between my pins, or clips in this case, so that the sleeve is laying nice and flat. all the way in a circle. All right, so now we can finish this seam allowance as well and press it up towards the sleeve of the shirt, and then do the same for the other sleeve. All right, so we've got our sleeves are finished. We've got our cuffs attached. Everything is sewn and finished nicely. We can set our sweatshirt or jacket to the side for right now because we're going to be working on the hood, and this is the same again for all views. So this is all going to look the same here for these next couple steps. All right, so we first need piece 9, which is our outer hood, and we should have 2 cut out of fabric and 2 cut out of lining, which I do, and remember that lining is cut short. And then we are going to need our hood insert, and that is piece 10, and we've cut 1 out of fabric and then 1 out of lining, and again that lining gets cut shorter at that lining line. So we can put that aside for now. And we can put our hood insert pieces aside for a minute, as well as our hood lining. So we're going to set that apart. All right, on our outside piece here, we have got, if we're putting grommets in, I have put a little piece of interfacing on either side, right where that is marked on the pattern. And I've gone ahead and marked where those grommets are going to go. Now, you don't have to do grommets if you don't want to. If you don't want to do grommets, you can very easily do a buttonhole here, or if your machine does an eyelet stitch, you can do that there as well. Completely up to you. But I'm going to be using eyelets, and I've actually have an eyelet press. Eyelets, a lot of times will come with a little tool that you can use a hammer as well. So either of these are completely fine. The handheld pliers are also completely fine. This is my guide that I'll be using, and I've got the correct pieces that are in here. But I am just going to take my punch here and punch a hole right where I want that grommet to go. Sometimes with the knit fabric, punching the hole is like the hard part. Like it doesn't want to punch all the way through. I guess because of maybe the elastane that's in there. And I actually am punching a hole that's a little bit smaller than what I need because I don't want this grommet to come out. All right, so on the right side of my hood, I'm just putting this grommet, and it's this piece of the grommet, through that hole. And then I'm going to set it on top of my press here. And then there's a second little piece. It's like a little ring. Just need one. And it gets set on top. Oh, well, you can't see anything, can you? Sorry. All right, so I've set that onto my press, and then we've put the little ring on top of that. And then I just do this. And just like that, my grommet is sealed in place. Again, there are tools that do hammers and stuff like that as well. So just follow the instructions on the back of your package. So go ahead and do that on both sides of your hood, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, once we've got our grommets in, it's now a time to assemble our hood. We're going to assemble our outer hood, and then we're going to assemble our hood lining, and then they'll get put together. And this is for all views. This is the same for all views. All right, so when we've got our hood insert piece, we've got one short end that has a notch in it. That is we're going to be putting that at the neck edge, okay? So we're going to start putting our pieces right sides together. Just gonna, and it doesn't matter which side of the hood, just pick one of the sides. And then we're going to match, there's a notch here on the curve of the hood, and that gets matched to the notch on the insert. And then we'll match our ends here. These are all right sides together. Nope. And this can get just a little bit fiddly because this hood insert is a very straight piece and you are sewing it into a curved piece of the hood. All right. Once we've got that pinned or clipped into place, I'm going to go to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew with the hood against the feed dogs, and I'm going to sew it 3/8 of an inch all the way down with my 3.0 millimeter stitch length, the straight stitch. Okay, so let me go do that and I'll be right back. All right, once we've got that sewn to one side, we are now going to pin the other side to the insert. All right, so again with the side piece of the hood against the feed dogs, I'm going to sew this at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance with my straight 3.0 stitch. Be right back. All right, so we've got ourselves a hood. This is the outer hood. Now I'm going to come back and with my tailor's ham and lay these seams, these two seams that I just sewed, and we're going to press those open. Okay, once that is all nice and pressed open, you can give that a good press from the right side too. We can set this piece, this hood aside for a minute. And then we need to come back and do the same steps to our lining. So we're going to sew this hood insert into our lining the same way. Again, we've got one end that's got the notch that goes on the neck edge. And we are just going to do the same thing, pin this in place, sew that seam allowance at 3/8 of an inch with a straight stitch, then sew the other side of the hood and then press those seam allowances open. So I'm going to do that real quick off camera and then I'll meet you back here. All right, once we've got our outer hood and our inner hood assembled, we are going to put them right sides together at the opening edge, the part that'll go around your face. And I'm going to start here at these seams at the top and pin them together. Now remember, our lining is smaller than our hood, but it will match up here at the front. It's just that when we turn everything right side out, that's when we'll get the nice pretty fold of the main fabric coming into the wrong side. I press those seam allowances open, but jersey likes to curl, so sometimes it doesn't like to stay open. And then I'm going to press or do a pin here at the bottom. This straight edge. All right. Once we have this all nice and pinned, our lining to our hood, to the main part of the hood, right sides together, I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew with the lighter fabric against the feed dogs. And I'm just going to sew that entire seam at 3/8 of an inch with that 3.0 millimeter stitch length all the way around. And then I'll come right back. Okay, once we've sewn that lining to the outer part of the hood there at the front, we are now separating our pieces here, separating the lining from the outer of the hood. And we're just going to stick a seam roll or a tailor's ham under there. And we just want to press that seam allowance towards the lining. Just give it a good little press all the way around. It's okay if those seam allowances don't want to stay open. Again, anything jersey is very curly and you pressed it open it's going to kind of do what it wants. But you do want to make sure that when you sew, that you sew those all open. Keep everything nice and flat. All right. Now we are going to take our lining and flip it over. And we're going to match all of our seam allowances now here at the bottom of the hood, making sure that those are open. And I'm just going to pop some pins in for now, or clips. Just to help everything lie nice and flat. Now, because our lining is smaller than our outer, it's going to pull that outer edge in. There's some notches that are here along that neck edge. You can just, again, we're just pinning them for now, but we want all those raw edges to match. And then when we are down here at the bottom where it folds over, your seam line here should match up with the notch that's there at your front there. And just like with the pocket edge, if you recall when we did our pockets, we're going to want a 1 inch. There should be a 1 inch overlap. So once we've got that all pinned around the bottom, now we can go around the edge, and we want to make sure that that is 1 inch. So we can take a seam gauge or any measuring device that you've got, and very easily we can measure and make sure that we're getting our 1 inch, and we can kind of fiddle with it if we're not. Now, at this point, you can put pins to keep things nice and flat. I'm actually just going to clip it right there along the fold. You can also, you know, of course, actually, I'm going to press it and then clip it. Just want to give that a good press. Then come back, clip that into place, just to keep that fold the way I want it, so that when we go to top stitch, everything lays nice and flat. All right. So now we are going to go to our sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch this in place at a 1 inch seam allowance, okay, all the way around. And we're going to do that from this right side. Now, if you are worried about your line not being 1 inch, again, I'm going to be lining mine up to a line on my sewing machine to make sure it's 1 inch. You can go through, measure your 1 inch, and mark that in with a erasable pen, water soluble pen, chalk, whatever you want, to make sure that you're keeping it even 1 inch all the way around. But that is completely up to you. So how neat you want to do that. So we're going to do our top stitching all around the front here. And then we are going to baste right along the edge at 1/4 of an inch around the neck edge. So let's go to the machine and do that. All right, so I am going to sew with the hood up because we are top stitching. And again, I'm lining up my folded edge to this 1 inch line that's here on my throat plate on my machine. And I'm taking my stitch length up to a 4.0 millimeter. You want to be careful that nothing is getting folded up under itself so that you're not accidentally sewing something you don't mean to sew. You know, if that lining is like creeping up or... Okay, now we want to go ahead and baste our neck edge together. That'll put putting it in so much easier. So I'm going to do this at 1/4 of an inch. So within our seam allowance, I'm going to leave it at that 4.0 millimeter stitch length. That's fine. And I am just sewing this bottom edge. All right, let's go take a look at our handiwork at the pressing station. All right, so there is our finished hood. It's looking quite nice. We can go ahead now and thread our whatever we're using for our cording. If you want, you could also wait to do this at the end. The instructions have us doing this now. Okay, and there we've got our hood ready to be attached. So this is where our all views end. So you're going to go on to the next step if you're sewing view A, and if you're sewing view B, you're going to want to skip ahead past the view A things to the view B stuff. All right, let's hit the next step. Okay, so now we're going to be attaching the hood for view A. So this is all view A instructions. So obviously we need our almost completed bodice of our hoodie, and we need our hood. So our kind of assembled hood. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to turn this hood inside out, because we are going to be placing it right sides together with the neckline of our top. So we're going to start also, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pin my drawstrings out of the way, just so nothing accidentally gets caught underneath the presser foot and I accidentally sew something I don't want to sew. All right, so we're going to start here at the edge of the hood, marking that with putting that next to center front. I've cut a little notch there at center front. That's where it was on the fold. And I'm going to pop a clip there. And then we've got a notch that's here that gets matched to our shoulder notch here on the neckline. So that is going to be my next pin, or clip in this case. We're going to clip all of our major parts and then we'll go back and fill in. Next, I've got center back that I have clipped, and that's going to match with center back here. So we can pin/clip that into place. And then we're going to match the next notch. And then again, center front. And those should butt the ends of the finished hood there should butt up together. And now we can go in between all of those pins and kind of make sure that those layers are together. We can pin those in place. All right, now we're going to go to the sewing machine and sew this on. All right, so I've turned my sweatshirt inside out so that my hood can be on the top. I just want to be able to see my hood, make sure that I am, getting these edges right here butted up, nicely to each other and that sort of thing. And we're going to start here at center front. We are switching our stitch to the zigzag stitch, which, as a reminder, that is a 2.5 length and then a 0.5 width. So that is, we're doing the zigzag here for around the neckline. And I am just going to slide this under here. And again, I'm going to start right here at center front. And we are sewing this at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once we get past that center front, it's a little bit easier. Just making sure all those raw edges match up and go all the way around. All right, so once we've sewn that, you just want to go around and check the underside and make sure that you didn't get anything pinched or that everything looks good. And oops, see, I'm going to show right here my, it's kind of hard to see with the, oops, sorry, with the light, but right here, after this, where are we on this garment? Doesn't matter, one of these seams here, my outer layer started to slip down and it hardly got caught. So this is the edge of the neckline. So I'm just gonna unpick from like, this is a pain because it is a zigzag stitch, but unpick from about here to about here, scooch that back up and re-sew that. So that's how I'm gonna fix that. So I will do that. You don't need to watch me do that off camera, but, and then we are gonna serge or finish off your seam allowance all the way around the neckline. So let's do that and I'll meet you back at the pressing table. All right, so I fixed my issue, which was right kind of here in the front. Got it all fixed. Everything is nice and where it should be. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna sew some twill tape into the back neckline. Again, I'm using ribbon for that, but you can also just, the whole point of it is that it stabilizes this back neckline so it doesn't get stretched out of shape. So that's the whole reason for it. So it just needs to be something that's not going to stretch, like ribbon or twill tape. So I'm using this velvet ribbon because it's really pretty and I think it looks nice with this. And we're going to be sewing this in place from shoulder notch to shoulder notch across the back of the neckline. So for this view, we're just going to fold that ribbon 1/2 inch to the wrong side. I'm actually going to turn this way. No, wait, we are going to keep it this way. Okay, sorry. And we're going to pin this to the seam allowance only. And here's one notch that we're starting at. And we're going to be clipping this inside the seam allowance. So I'm lining up the edge of this ribbon, in this case, right to the edge of that seam line that we have already sewn. We're going to clip that. And again, I folded that to the wrong side. And then we're just going to go around the back of the neck here. Kind of just clip it in a couple of places. Although, to be honest, I may, well, this is fine. See, sometimes it's nice to not cut it to the size and just kind of sew and then trim it, but and then when we get over to this other notch that is right there, it's not a very far distance. I'm just going to cut this ribbon 1/2 inch past there, fold it back on itself, and then clip that in place. All right, so here's basically what we're doing. We are first going to do a pass, and we're going to sew this with a straight stitch here along this top edge, sewing it to the seam allowance only. So we are not sewing this to anything but the seam allowance on this first pass. Just keeping the edge of that ribbon right next to that seam line. So let's go to the sewing machine and do that. All right, so I have got my straight stitch back on, which is the 3mm straight stitch. And again, guys, this is just that seam allowance of where I sewed the hood and the body of the jacket together. And I'm basically just edge stitching. So I'm just gonna go real slow and I'm lining up the edge of that ribbon right to that sewn line. And I'm sewing about 1/16 of an inch away from the edge of the ribbon. All right, so again, that is sewn to with the hood side facing up. So this is the hood lining that we're looking at, and we've sewn that tape into place. Now we are going to go to the ironing board, and we are going to press the seam allowance all the way around that neck edge down towards the body, and then we're going to top stitch, and the top stitching will catch the lower edge of this ribbon or you know, twill tape, whatever you're using, in its grasp. So let's go to the ironing board and get that pressed. Okay, so I've got everything turned inside out. I just find it's a little easier. It's going to be easier to sew here in just a second, but also to press. And I'm just sticking seam roll, ham, whatever, in there so we can press that seam allowance down towards the body, including the ribbon or twill tape, whatever you're using. Okay, now my ribbon is wider than the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. It's like probably a 1/2 of an inch. So I am going to be sewing not at the edge of this tape, although I guess we could drop down if we wanted to do a little design feature there in the back. It's whatever you want to do. But I am going to be sewing from the right side. So if you did want to pop in some pins just to have an idea of where the edge of your tape is, that's fine. A lot of times you can also just feel as you're sewing from the right side where that area is. So completely up to you. But now we're going to top stitch around the whole neck edge of the sweatshirt, top stitching that seam allowance down. So let's go to the machine and do that. Okay, so I'm changing my stitch length to a 4.0 millimeter, but straight stitch for this. And I want to start actually at center back. So find center back, which is right there. And I've got my sweatshirt turned inside out. So, so that I can sew with the neck edge, the right side up. All right, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew it lower here in the back. Technically, you're supposed to be sewing 1/4 of an inch all the way around, but because my twill tape is a little thicker, I'm going to do a little jog, but make it look intentional. And I can feel where that twill tape ends. Right, one more. And I'm going to go up, and I'm going to go 2 stitches up, and now I'm at 1/4 of an inch. And now I will do 1/4 of an inch, going around the front. Just keep twisting the sweatshirt as you go, keeping those cords or drawstrings, whatever you're using, out of the way. And then I'm feeling for where that twill tape starts again, which is right there. One more. And then I'll go down the 2 stitches. Trim my tail as I make my way around. And then when we get back to where we started, we can backstitch. And then we just want to come in here and make sure we caught everything. I think we're probably good with the seam allowance, but just making sure that that ribbon got caught, and it did. Very nice. See, and if you were using matching thread, you wouldn't even see that. So right, so our hood is attached. Let's go back to the sewing table and we will finish this up. Okay, our last step on view A is to attach the lower band. So this is attaching the lower band for view A. And honestly, you know, if you look, your sweatshirt is done. We could probably take these, release our drawstrings. You know, the hood is on. We've got that twill tape that needs to be, some threads that need to be trimmed, that twill tape in the back. Neck edge is all finished. Our sleeves, everything's all done except for the bottom band here. So let's set this aside for just a minute. So we've got a couple of things we need to do. So now we need our piece 12, which is the lower front band, and, or sorry, our piece 11, which is the lower back band, and our piece 12, which is the lower front band. I am just going to, these are both cut on the fold. I'm opening up my lower back band, and I am just going to put a pin in here so that I can easily tell that it is the lower back. So that's just something I like to do. This is right side up, and we're going to put our lower front band right side down. And we are going to pin them or clip them at their sides. This is very similar to how we did our cuff. Okay, now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew each of these short ends at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to be using that zigzag stitch, so that 2.5 length, 0.5 width zigzag stitch. So let me go do that real quick and I'll meet you right back here. All right, once we have sewn those seams on either end, we're just going to pop something here in between, press those seam allowances open. All right, now we are going to put this wrong sides together. We're folding it in half, wrong sides together. Again, just like we did for our cuffs. And I am just going to pop a couple of clips in here. Keep things wrangled till I can give a good press. All right, now we can just hit this with our iron and get a nice crease in the bottom of that band. Now it is time to attach this to the bottom of our sweatshirt. We're almost done. So I've got the bottom edge of my sweatshirt here. I've got center front that's marked. I've got center back that I have marked, and then we have got our side seams. So we are going to be matching our, we're going to take our band and put it over our bottom of our sweatshirt, right sides together. Yes, and remember I marked my back, so I know that this half of my band is needs to go against the back. And now we are just going to match right sides together. I'm matching center back notches. I am matching my side seam here. Then I will match center front. Now your band is smaller than the circumference of the bottom of your hoodie, so we're going to be stretching our band to fit our bottom of our sweatshirt. Okay, so I'm just going to mark those 4 points. So as you can see, in between these points, we have more bottom. So when I'm sewing, I'm actually just going to stretch a little bit. And we are going to sew with the ribbing against the feed dogs at 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to use that zigzag stitch, that 2.5 millimeter length at 0.5 width. So let's go to the sewing machine and sew this on. One option that you could do is you could baste your ribbing together, since those folded up together, if you would like. I've not been having any issues with my ribbing behaving, so I'm going to leave it as is. But I'm just going to start here at center back. Again, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance with that small zigzag that we've been using. And I am going to start. And then I am just going to stretch in between my pins. So I'm just stretching that ribbing. Again, jersey likes to curl. So as I go between pin and pin, I'm just pulling, lining up my raw edges. All right, once you have sewn all the way around the perimeter of your sweatshirt, we can finish off that seam allowance if you are finishing off seam allowances, and then I will meet you back at the pressing station for us to press that seam up, and then we're finished with view A. All right, our last step here on view A is just to press that seam allowance of that bottom band up towards the body, which we can do. And now we have got a finished Stanton hoodie view A. So well done. All right, this is for view B. We are doing our hood attachment for view B. So we've got our little jacket here, kind of. That's opened up, and we've got our finished hood. So before we go any further, I'm actually going to pin or clip my drawstrings out of the way here so that they aren't accidentally sewn over. All right, so now we're going to be attaching our hood to the top of our jacket. So we're going to take our hood, we can flip it, wrong side out, because we are going to be putting the finished edge of the hood. You should have a notch right here, which is 3/8 of an inch away from the cut edge of the opening. And we are matching that folded edge to that notch there at center front. So it is 3/8 of an inch in from that cut edge. And we're going to pop a clip in there. And then we've got a notch here on the hood that matches with this notch on the yoke. So we'll pop it there. The hood and jacket are right sides together. And then we can pop a clip in here in between those two. And then I'm going to flip it around. I've got center back of the hood that I'm matching to center back of the neckline. Again, I'm going to put a pin in between those two, or a clip, excuse me. Then again, we're going to match the notch on the hood to the notch here on the neckline. And then here at center front, which again, 3/8 of an inch in from that cut edge. All right, so now that that is pinned, the hood is pinned right sides together to the jacket, we are going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew with our little zigzag stitch, our 2.5 millimeter length by 0.5 width, stitch our hood to our neckline. So let's go do that. Okay, so again, we've got our zigzag stitch at 2.5 millimeter length and 0.5 width. And I am just using that to sew my hood to the neckline of my jacket. I am going slow, making sure that my raw edges all match up. Our hood has been basted, the bottom edge there has been basted, but I just want to make sure that my raw edge of the neckline is matching up with the raw edge of the hood. right, so we just want to make sure nothing slipped with our neckline. That all looks good. Okay, we are going to go back to the pressing station and press this seam allowance down towards the body and move on to our next step. Okay, so we've got this hood sewn on. This is going to get finished off later. So I'm just going to press my seam allowance down towards the body before we move on to our next step. So just help in a later step. All right, let's set this aside for a minute. Oop. The next thing we are going to need, this is the bottom band for view B. And we need piece 11, which is the lower back band, and we've got one of those cut on the fold. So I'm going to open that out. And then we've got 2 of piece 12, which is the lower front band, and we've cut that on view B. So we've got that 2 of these. And I am going to match this right sides together, matching those notches that are at the end. Then this side as well. I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine using that same zigzag stitch, that 2.5 length, 0.5 width. And I am going to sew both of these seam allowance, both of these seams at 3/8 of an inch wide real quickly. And then I will come back and we'll move on to the next step. All right, once those 2 seams are sewn, I'm just going to press them open really quick. All right, and we're going to leave this. I mean, this eventually does get folded up on itself, but we're leaving it for now. So this is different. If you were watching any of the view A, this is different. All right, we're going to take the bottom of our jacket here. So here's our bottom, here's the front. We're going across the side. And we're going to put right sides together. Our bottom band, we are going to pin it to the bottom of the jacket. And we're going all the way. Remember here at the bottom, the top of the pocket piece extends. That's what we're matching this to. We're matching it to that edge, not to the shorter edge underneath. And we're just going to put a clip there. We're going to match our side seams. Now keep in mind that our ribbing is shorter than our bottom of our jacket. So we're going to be stretching it to fit. That's okay. I'm also going to pop, so I'm not putting a ton of pins in here. I'm going to pop a clip here at center back. And then again at this side seam. And then again here at center front. All right, now let's go back to the machine with our little zigzag stitch and stitch this down. Okay, we're going to stitch our band down. I'm going to sew with my ribbing against the feed dogs. Just going to go nice and slow because this jersey loves to curl. I'm using that small zigzag stitch, which is a 2.5 length. 0.5 width. I'm just going to get this started. And then I've got my other pin here at the side seam. I'm just going to stretch as I go. Trying not to stretch the bottom of the jacket because stretching is what makes that jersey really want to curl. Remember, this is just a single layer of the ribbing. All right, So once that is all sewn, let's go back to the pressing station, and we are going to press this down towards the ribbing. Okay, once we've got that lower band sewn on partially, we're going to open this up and press the seam allowance down towards the ribbing. Okay, that will eventually get caught up in the band when it gets folded up. All right, now the next thing that we need is our zipper. But before we do that, I just want to really quickly fold my band here. I just want to mark, I'm just going to clip a notch, very small little notch, right there at the center of the band, both on the front and the back, just because this is going to help tell us where our zipper needs to end. So I'm just going to make a little clip there so that I know that that's where that is. All right, so we need our zipper. I am opening up, this is my left side when worn side of my jacket. And I've got my zipper. I have on the right side, so this is the zipper facing up, I have attached 2 lines of Wonder tape. It's basically glue. I just find this is very helpful when inserting zippers. And it helps keep, especially when you're dealing with a fabric that's kind of moves around a lot like a knit, it really helps to keep things glued in place. So that is what this white paper is. So I have pressed it down, actually ironed it down. This type that I'm using needed to be ironed. And then there's paper that's right here. So I will just pick up that paper when it is time to lay my zipper down, and then we will go from there. So we want to take, again, this is the left side of our jacket. This side of the zipper, we're going to be putting this right side down here in just a second. This side of the zipper is what's going to be attached to this side. So I'm just going to pull off my paper here, making sure that my glue stayed. Yeah. And I am matching the bottom edge up here because I also don't like to use pins or clips with my zippers. I feel like it distorts the zipper tape. Up to you though. So I marked this center part of my ribbing, so that's where I want the bottom of my zipper, so that when this gets folded up on itself, when everything is all said and done, that's going to be the bottom of the jacket. So I want to match that up with that notch that I just took, and I'm actually just going to hit it with the iron. Careful not to iron my teeth because this is a nylon zipper and I don't want to melt anything. And now I'm just ironing my zipper in place, matching the edge of my tape to the cut edge of the jacket. When we get up here to the top, we do want this seam allowance, even though we pressed it down towards the body, we do want to flip it up. So we want that seam allowance going up. And I've got a lot more zipper than I need here, which is fine. It's easy to cut off the top. And honestly, it's kind of nice to have a zipper that's a little too long because it will keep the zipper pull out of the way while we're sewing. All right, so that is nice and glued down. It's temporary glue, but it'll work really well while we sew in our zipper. So let's now go to the sewing machine and we're actually going to baste this zipper in place real quick. All right, so I've got my straight stitch back on my machine. I'm doing a 4mm length because we're basically just basting this in place because there's like a facing that's going to be put in here eventually. But I've got my zipper foot on. I've moved my needle over to the left so that we can ride pretty close to the teeth here. I may move it just a hair more. And we're starting here at the top. Yeah, I'm gonna go over one. Okay. And again, just with a straight stitch. And I'm keeping the zipper attached here. And you'll see why here in a minute. All right, I'm just following along my zipper foot along the edge of the teeth. All right, so we have got our first pass done here. That looks good from this side. Okay, so that looks good. So let's go back to the pressing station. I'm going to show you how we're going to mark the other side of the zipper so that we can get things lined up nicely. All right, so we've got that first pass of that zipper end kind of basted in place. What I'm going to do now, before we separate and do the other side, is I'm using a regular pin for this because we're going to be ironing this tape on, and anything that goes away with heat will disappear. But also, this is going to be on the inside of the jacket. This is the wrong side of the zipper that's facing up, and it's going to be on the inside, sandwiched between the facing. You're never going to see it, so not worried about it. But I'm just going to mark a few important places, like where this seam is, just with an ink pen, where this seam is, maybe, that attaches the ribbing to the bottom of the jacket. And then I'm going to pull things nice and taut. But where the seam is here at the top of the pocket. And then where the seam is here for the neck edge. Okay, because those are all important points of reference that I want to match on the other side. All right, so once I've done that, I can unzip my zipper. And take it off. And now we're going to be working on the right-hand side. Of the jacket, like so. Okay, I'm just going to pull this all the way up to the top. I did not mean to take that all the way off. All right. Okay, I'm going to take my paper off. Flip this around this way. So now we've got the wrong side of our zipper facing towards the right side here. So now what we're going to do is the same thing that we were doing on the other side and ironing that in place, but I am matching up those marks I made to those points. So I want this mark here to match up to that seam at my neck. Being very careful. And then this, because as we sew, especially with knit fabrics, sometimes it gathers things up a little bit. So I'm gonna put that in place. We'll get the rest here in a minute. And then I want to make sure that that matches down here. All right, now we can go back to the sewing machine and sew this in place. All right, so we're going to start at the bottom this time. Following that foot right next to those teeth. All right. All right, let's go back to the pressing table and do our next step. Okay, so we have got, I've zipped up the jacket, and now we want to check and make sure that our seams are all matching up. And mine look really good, which is why we marked those when we did that the first time. So, well done. So it's good at this point to go ahead and check. All right, now we need to unzip the zipper again, because it is time for our last piece to be put in. And that is piece 12, which is our zipper facing. We needed to cut 2 of fabric and 2 of interfacing, and I fused the interfacing to the back. The interfacing is optional. I just think it's a really nice touch. And it's also optional if you want to go ahead and finish off the long edge of your of this piece. So you know you've got this neckline here. This is the shorter edge. This is the longer edge. I've gone ahead and sent mine through the serger. You can zigzag it, or you can leave it. If your fabric doesn't fray, you can absolutely leave it. All right. Our next step is we're going to get this zipper facing all sewn in. So we are going to take, I'm going to actually grab just one side. Doesn't matter which side we're doing first here. So this is my left side when worn. Again, we want that zipper laying flat. So this is the wrong side of the zipper facing up. So that seam is laying nice and flat. And we are going to take one of our pieces and we're laying it this way. So here's my longer edge. It matches the neckline eventually. But we're going to line this up to the bottom of this ribbing. I mean, it's like way too short. That's fine. That is fine. We are matching this up to the bottom of the ribbing. Like so. And we are going to sew at 3/8 of an inch, that straight stitch, that 3.0, I think. Yes. We're going to use the 3.0 millimeter straight stitch. And I'm just going to sew the facing to the bottom of this ribbing on both sides. So let me do that real quick and I'll be right back. Okay, so using that straight stitch, I've sewn at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, the facing to the bottom of the ribbing. Again, this is way short. That's fine. I've also gone ahead and finished the seam, or the cut edge, I guess not, oh, it's a seam here, and then a cut edge, of the facing and the bottom edge of this ribbing all the way across to the other side. Okay, it's going to be important in another step. So now we are going to take our facing. If you are working on the side that has your pull, make sure that that pull is down midway, okay? Actually, you know what? We'll just do that side because this can get confusing, and there's nothing worse than going through all of this rigmarole and then realizing you've accidentally cut your zipper pull off. Not that I would know anything about that. All right, so here we are on the other side, again, really short. We're going to take this top part and bring it up to our neckline. My pull, I've pulled it down. My pull is now somewhere in the middle of the body here. We're going to take our hood and we're going to put it down because we want this seam allowance of the hood and the neckline to be up. And now we're going to pull this piece up and match it with that neck edge. And pop some pins in. And the edge of this facing will come to the seam here underneath. All right. Now we are going to go to the sewing machine and actually just sew right along that previous stitch line where we sewed our hood and to our neckline. We can just go and sew that down, and now we're sewing the facing down. So let's go do that. All right, so we've got our machine set to our 3.0 straight stitch, and I'm just gonna pop this under here. Now we put most of this, when we attached our hood, we were using the zigzag stitch, but we want to use the straight stitch for this little part here with our facing. And I'm just gonna start right there. And I'm gonna go slow and make sure that all of my layers are together. So I don't want that facing layer, and there's a lot of layers through here. And then when I get, now I've got a nylon zipper, so my teeth should be fine, not to break, but I do want to go slowly and definitely backstitch when you get to the end there. All right. And that all looks good on that side. All right, I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, and then I'll meet you back at the pressing table. All right, so we backstitched at each end of our facing. We want that to be nice and secure. And now we can trim off that extra tape, maybe a little bit of that bulk there at that corner. Be very careful, you don't want to get too close to that stitching line though. And then we can do the same on the other side. Again, you want to make sure that that pull is on, and you don't accidentally cut it off. It's so frustrating. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to sew up the edge of the zipper. Now this is the side that has my pull, so we're going to move it as we sew. But basically, we are sewing, we're folding this up, and this should fold really easily right at that notch that we made and right at the end of that zipper. And your seams should match up here at the top. Now you've got one seam allowance that's going down, and this seam allowance is actually going to go up, so it nests. That's what we want. We want this seam allowance to be going towards the free seam allowance that hasn't been sewn down yet. We want that going towards the facing. So we want it going up. And then pop a pin there. Now the rest of this should fit nice and easily in between the facing. So we are sandwiching that zipper tape in between the jacket and the facing. Just like so. Now, up here, when we get to this edge, we actually want, because remember when we were putting our hood on, we were pressing that seam allowance down, and we want that seam allowance to go down. So I'm actually going to kind of push that seam allowance back the other way. Boop, just like that. So just right at that edge. Okay, we're gonna do the same for the other side. But now we're gonna go to the machine, and we are going with our zipper foot, and we're gonna sew these together. All right, I'm gonna sew with my facing piece up. And remember, we wanna make sure that the seam allowance that connects the lower body to the bottom band is going down, and then the seam allowance that is attached the facing to the lower band is going up. Okay, that's going to be important to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Now I am just going to, I can feel where that zipper is. Got my zipper foot on, and oh, helps if you turn on the differential feed or have a walking foot on of some sort. There we go. Okay, I can feel my pull here. So I'm just going to raise up that presser foot and move it down and out of the way. All right. Once that is done, when we turn things right side out, we've got a really lovely inserted separating zipper. So do that to the other side and I'll meet you back at the pressing station to do some pressing. All right, so we've got our facings on, our zipper tape sandwich nice and neat there in the middle. So let's turn this all right side out. You can use a little point turner to help you turn that if you need to. Pull that zipper kind of away a little bit, both sides. And now we can just kind of use our iron very carefully. Again, we don't want to accidentally melt any, especially if you're using nylon or plastic zipper teeth, which I do have on here. You don't want to melt those, but you do want to give this a good press. And then our next step is going to be to get this lower band secured. All right. Okay, so our next step, like I said, is we're going to work on this bottom band. We want it folding it up. Again, this is going to sit, so we've got our sewing line here. So our seam allowance down here is going down. This seam allowance is going up, and we will be overlapping that seam line by 3/8 of an inch. So, and remember, we had to stretch this ribbing to fit the bottom. So the same is going to have to be said as we are going through this, putting this up. I am just going to, from this side, pop some pins in. And then we're going to flip them so I can get a good press there at the bottom crease. And then we're going to switch our pins to the right side because we're going to be stitching in the ditch to get this looking nice. Again, we've got excess here. That's okay because we had to stretch that ribbing in order to fit. Just basically matching up my side seams and center back here. And then like right here at the front edge. All right, I'm just going to give a good press to the bottom edge here of this ribbing. All right, now we want to pin this in place on the right side because we are going to be stitching in the ditch. And what that means is that we are going to be stitching right along this seam line all the way across the bottom to catch that back of that ribbing into that seam. So I am just going to pin like I'm going to stitch. So let me just go around the whole bottom here, and anything that I've already pinned in place, I'm just gonna flip-flop that so that all my pins are on the right-hand side. And again, we are going to have to stretch this ribbing in order for it to fit. Okay, once we've got that all nice and pinned in place, let's go to the sewing machine and let's stitch that down. All right, let's stitch in the ditch. So like I mentioned, what that means is we are literally stitching right in between this seam line. So I've got my straight stitch on, but it's at the 4mm stitch length. And I am back stitching here. And I am just trying to sew right in between that seam. And I'm gonna kind of pull as I go because, again, that bottom band does need to be stretched as you go. And also, again, if you were using matching thread, this would be much easier. I do want to err, though, on the side of the lower bottom here of the jacket side as opposed to the ribbing. All right, so there we go. We can flip this over, make sure we've got everything caught on the back and we are good there. And everything is good on the front. All right, we're getting close. We just got to finish the neck edge. Let's go take care of that. Okay, we are getting really close. We just need to finish off the neck edge up here and then do some top stitching around center front and we're good to go. It's very exciting. Okay, so what we are going to do next is here up at the neck edge, we're going to turn these facings just a little bit to the right side so that they're flipped inside out, because we're going to sew our twill tape / ribbon, whatever you might be using. Now, I am not going to pin anything in place here. I am just going to, we're going to overlap this seam where this facing is by, I don't know, like a 1/2 inch maybe, not folding anything under. And we're gonna sew this down using a straight stitch to the seam allowance only. The seam allowance of the hood and the jacket body right along this edge, matching that edge up, you know, like a 1/16 of an inch in from the edge, but matching that edge up to the previous stitch line, okay? So let's go, and again, I'll cut it when we're done. So let's go over to the machine and get that sewn down. Okay, so I have got my machine at my 3.0mm stitch length. I have got my jacket here. And again, I've got my facing flipped over to the wrong side here. And I'm just gonna overlap the edge of my ribbon by, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch, somewhere around there. And we're just gonna sew. And I'm matching the raw edge of that ribbon up to the stitch line, the previous stitch line. So we are sewing only to the seam allowance. And we're sewing right inside that stitching line. And this is going to give some stability to our neck edge so that nothing gets pulled out of whack. You also want to make sure that you are only stitching on that seam allowance, that nothing's getting tucked up underneath. And then when we get to the other facing here, we will stitch until we're about, again, 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch over that. I'm gonna back stitch. And then we can cut off that excess ribbon, like so. All right. We are now, I'm going to go back to the pressing area and I'm going to talk you through a few things and then we're going to finish this up. Okay, so we've got that twill tape, ribbon, whatever we're using. sewn in, and now we can turn those facings back the way that they were. Like so. And then our twill tape, ribbon, whatever you're using, will totally, it's going to encase that raw seam. As you can see, it will do. Okay, which is very exciting. You can pop some pins in there if you want to. I'm just going to kind of feel along as we go, because our next step and our final step is we're going to do some top stitching. We're going to top stitch about 1/4 inch away from our seam line here, starting at the bottom with a 4 millimeter length straight stitch. And we're going to start here at the bottom, and we're going to stitch all the way up till we get up here to the top of our zipper. Still need to trim that. And then we're going to pivot, and we're going to sew all around the neckline, catching the bottom part of this tape into that seam as we sew that, as we top stitch. And then we'll come all the way over here to this side and stitch down the front, ending at other center front. Okay, so let's go do that real quick. All right, it is time to do some stitching. I have got, there we go, hanger on there. We're just going to go real slow around this. I'm starting here at the bottom, and I've got a 4 millimeter stitch length, a straight stitch. And I did a back stitch there at the front, and we're just going to go slow. And I'm very, so carefully pulling the zipper tape this way and pulling the rest of the seam to the left, just to make sure that that is exactly. Now again, you're going to want a walking foot or dual feed. I've got dual feed on my machine. I've got it engaged. You do need to actually have it engaged in order for it to work, funnily enough. If you're getting starting to get like any puckers or pushes, you can always stop, readjust things, and then start again. When we get up here to this neck edge, we're going to stop and we're going to pivot. And now I am pulling my hood one way and my body of my jacket the other way. And I can feel the edge of that tape under here. All right, let's go back and do one last look. Okay, we have got our finished hoodie. That back seam all encased with our ribbon. The top stitching is done. We've got cuffs on. The bottom band is all nice and finished. Our seams match up nicely across our zippers. Everything looks good. And there you have it, your finished view B of your Stanton hoodie. Let me know if you have any questions. And there you have it. You have sewn up your Stanton hoodie. Now, remember, you can watch this sew along as many times as you would like. If you made view A and now you're ready to tackle view B or vice versa, these instructions are here for you guys at any time. So here is our beautiful hoodies with our lovely, I love this feature, lovely lined hoods that I just think it's just beautiful, as well as lined pockets. We've got our cuffs all on here, contrast on the hoodie version here, and something a little more streamlined here on our pullover. So hopefully this sew along was helpful. As always, if you have any questions at all or comments, please leave those down below. I'm happy to get to those as soon as possible. Don't forget, if you're wondering where to get your pattern to make your own Stanton hoodie, this pattern is available in the regular collection at Cashmerette's website, cashmerette.com. I will leave that link down below. Or if you'd like to become an all-access tiered member of their club, this pattern is actually included with that, as there is a Stanton expansion pattern available in the club. So 2 different options for ways to get your hands on this pattern. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. Again, any questions down below. And until next time, happy sewing.